Hello to this new video. As supposed, in the last video I wanted to show you how you simply create texture-based abstract video control nets, which you then can later on use in ComfyUI, Automatic11 or any other AI image creation program. So this is all abstract. It is not a control net for some person, movement, dance, move or anything else. This is more abstract to bring some abstract motion into your AnimateDiff animation. This is all texture based and we do it in Blender. If you're not familiar with Blender, Blender is a 3D software which is open source and you can download it freely on the web page blender.org. I put all the links in the description below. Let's start from scratch. Here you see the kind of textures I want to create today. You can use this simply as a base for everything you want to do. With textures, it's quite straightforward. We have a node-based shader. It's node-based like you know it from ComfyUI. I usually start with a new scene. If you open Blender, it looks like this. I left-click on the cube and press delete. You can see all the keys I use in the left-hand corner. I then create a mesh, a plane. It's under Add Mesh Plane. And then I create a shader. For the shader creation, I like to use this panel down here and click on the left corner to switch to the shader editor and simply click on New, and you get a new shader. To see what the shader does, you need to activate the viewport shading. You can do this by clicking on the most right sphere, and this will give you a real-time shader view of the texture in the viewport. I like to delete the principled BSDF node and then create a simple emission node. The emission node is simply a node which shows a pure color and it's not reacting to the light you have in the scene and shadows or something like this. So it's pure color. So at this moment I like to delete the light in the scene. Simply right click on it and click delete. Then click on the plane again. And then let's start with the first texture. We use the normal noise texture. We connect the FAC port with the color port of the emission. And now we see the texture. For now, I like to reduce the roughness and the detail. And then I like to add some brightness and some contrast. So like this. And I want to make it a little bit bigger. So put the scale to like, let's do 2.3. I switch the noise texture type to 4D so that we can animate it in a way I like. And then I use the W setting. To animate the W value, we use the hash sign. And then we type in frame. This increases when the timeline processes. And I want to divide this by, let's do 300. So then this gets pink. And I know this is animated now. So if you press Shift, you see the texture is getting animated now and it is moving. So I want to increase the contrast a little bit more and the brightness. Play around with those values depending on what you like. So this should be the first video. What we are missing now is we need the camera to be adjusted in the right way. So we click on the camera, we press 0, and this shows us what the camera is actually recording when we press render. Go to the scene settings and we exchange the X and Y settings. So we put this to 1080 and the other setting to 1920. This gives us the camera in portrait mode. Since I want it in portrait mode for our workflow, which is working in portrait mode at the moment, you can keep this at normal landscape mode if you like this more, or if you need this for your scene. Then we need to adjust the rotation and the location of the camera. I type in here. You can do this with clicking on item and then transform in the right corner of the viewport. Then we put in 0, 0, and something like, I don't know, like 9 here. And we do 0, 0, and 90 degrees for the rotation. And we see we are coming nearer to what we want. So decrease the Z location value to something like this, 2.74. We have our texture right in place inside the camera, and we can now export this video to our hard drive. So the export settings you find in the scene tab. At first we change the format that it fits our ComfyUI latent image format. So we use 288 as X resolution and 512 as a Y resolution. Then under output we have our path value, and we can switch to FFmpeg video here. On the encoding we can choose MPEG 4, and then we have our H.264 settings down here where we can specify the encoding settings. That's it. Change your path, specify the folder where you want it to be saved, and if you're done with this, you can find the start render settings here. On the top in the left corner, can choose render animation, or you can simply click Ctrl F12 and everything will be rendered. This is the first texture I want to create. Let's do another one. So I select this texture and I press G and Y and Control to move aside, and then I add another plane, and we can choose our former shader now, and based on this we can create a new texture and a new video. If you want to have a separate texture and don't change this shader texture, we need to click on this 2 here to free the shader from the other shader so we can edit it and the changes will not influence the texture from before. So click on this and then it's separate, autonomous, and then we can change everything. Let's create Voronoi texture. Let's delete the noise texture and put the Voronoi texture here, and then I like to adjust the scale. I again want this texture to be 4D so I can animate it, and we type in hash frame divided by 300 again into the W setting to get this animated. Play around with the brightness and the contrast settings. You can adjust the speed of the movement by changing the divider here. You can put in 100, for example, and you see it's much faster. So maybe we put it to 200. Let's keep it like that. Export your frames. Maybe important to know the frame range and the length of the video can be defined here. So start frame is 1 and end frame is 250. Depending on the animation length and the batch size in ComfyUI, you have to adjust this. I simply put it to 250 because the most of my AnimateDiff animations are not so long, so I'm good to go. It will not run out of frames. Select the plane, press G and Y to move it out of the camera, and we can press D and Y and Control to duplicate this, and then we have to duplicate the shader also, so press on 2 down here. So this texture is separated again, and we can start our next texture. Now I like to use the wave texture. You can delete the Voronoi texture and connect the wave texture. And now we can play with this. You can distort it and make it like this. You can change the details, make it totally chaotic. And to animate this, we need some more now because it has not the 4D feature. So we need to add some coordinates, add input texture coordinate, and then we need to change this texture coordinates to bring this texture to movement. We add a vector and the mapping node. So we need to connect the generated port to the vector port and then the vector port to the vector port of the wave texture. And now we are able to animate different values. I like to animate the location, for example. Slowly animate this. You see the movement. So let's type in hash frame and then divide it by 200. This looks all right already. I like to put the detail a little bit more, so like this. And maybe we let it move to the top or down. Let's change the location and put in hash frame divided by 300 so that we get a little movement. Let's change the scale a little bit and maybe adjust the brightness and the contrast. And maybe let's rotate this a little bit. Let's change the Z value like this. And there we go. You can export this with Control F12 and you have your video for the ControlNet in ComfyUI. So as a last one, I want to create something a little bit different. Let's move this to the side. Press G, and with Control you can move it here, then press Shift D and we have a copy of it. Duplicate the texture and make it autonomous from the other object. Now I like to create a gradient texture. Delete those two and now create texture gradient. Let's connect the FAC port to the color port, the generated port to the vector port, and you see we have a gradient here. I like to change this to spherical. So we have a spherical gradient. And let's try if the object coordinates brings this to the middle. Yes, it does. I like to have something like a tunnel or something which gives us a feeling we are flying into it or it flies towards us. So I want to use the converter node, the mass node, and put the setting to truncated modulo. So with that we can change the one gradient to several gradients which are sitting in each other. Let's do it to 1 for now. Duplicate this, set this to multiply. And we can now change the number of circles we want to have. If you want it to be from white to black, we need to put modulo to 1. Otherwise, it will be getting darker. We want all the color from white to black. And then let's put it to something like this here in the multiply node. And now for the movement, I like to add another mass node. So copy it with Shift C and V, or you can use Shift D. And we set this node to add. And when we now change this value, you see it's moving outside. So we put our hash frame value in here again, divided by 200, and we get a nice movement. That's all the textures I'd like to show you. Play around with those settings here. Play around by using different textures. There's lots to discover here. Blender is an awesome software, which is a perfect playmate for ComfyUI or Automatic1111 to create some control nets or basic images to use it for in-painting or whatever you want to use. Check out my other Blender tutorials. I will link the playlist in the description below. And if you haven't seen the former video, check out the ComfyUI workflow, which we are using the ControlNets in. Try this new video ControlNets with the workflow from last week. I hope you can create great results with it. Thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next video. I will upload the Blender file from this tutorial into my Patreon page. You don't need to be a base member. It's simply necessary to add me. You can download it for free with a free membership. Goodbye.